When I bought the property on Cedar Ridge Road, the realtor described it with 3 words that instantly sold me. Private access included. That meant something very specific to me. No shared driveways, no neighbors arguing about parking, no HOA committees deciding how I could enter my own land. Just a road. My road. The gravel lane stretched about 200 yards from the county road up a gentle slope to the house sitting at the top of the hill. On both sides were tall pine trees and thick brush that blocked the view of the surrounding neighborhood. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what I wanted. The realtor explained that the road had been built years ago by the previous owner and was registered as part of the property deed. It connected directly to the county road and didn't cross anyone else's land. In other words, it was completely legal private access. And the best part? The HOA that governed the nearby subdivision had 0 authority over it. Or at least, that's what I believed. For the first 2 weeks after moving in, everything was perfect. Mornings started with coffee on the porch while fog rolled through the trees, drifting slowly between the pines like something out of a nature documentary. The only sounds were birds waking up and the wind moving through the branches above the driveway. Evenings were just as quiet. Sometimes I'd sit outside after sunset and watch the sky fade from orange to deep blue while crickets chirped in the brush. Occasionally, a car would pass on the county road below, its headlights briefly flashing through the trees before disappearing again. It felt like living miles away from everything, even though the neighborhood subdivision was technically only a few streets over. The HOA sent a welcome letter the day after I moved in, but it mostly looked like the usual neighborhood stuff. Trash day reminders, parking rules, lawn height guidelines, nothing about the road, nothing about access, nothing about barriers. So I ignored it. Then 3 weeks later, I came home from work and found something strange. 2 bright orange traffic cones sitting in the middle of my road, right in the center of the gravel lane about 20 feet past the entrance. At first, I assumed the county had left them there after doing roadside work. Maybe they were marking something near the ditch and someone moved them out of the way. It didn't seem like a big deal. I pulled over, stepped out of my truck, and grabbed both cones. The plastic was scuffed and dusty like they'd been sitting in someone's garage for years. I tossed them casually into the ditch beside the road. Problem solved. Or so I thought. The next morning, when I walked outside to leave for work, the cones were back. But this time they weren't alone. A metal sign had been hammered into the ground beside the road entrance. White background, black letters. Private road, HOA access only. I stood there staring at it for several seconds, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. HOA access only? This road wasn't HOA property. It wasn't even inside the subdivision boundary. In fact, one of the reasons I bought the property was because it sat just outside the HOA line on the county zoning map, which meant they couldn't control it. I walked over to the sign, grabbed the metal pole, and pulled. The dirt around the base cracked as it came loose. With one strong yank, the whole thing popped free from the ground. I looked at it for another second, shaking my head, then tossed it into the back of my truck next to the cones and drove to work. That afternoon, I decided to call the HOA office just to clear things up before things got weird. The woman who answered the phone sounded bored before I even finished explaining why I was calling. "Yes, that road has been designated for community maintenance access," she said casually. I blinked. What? The board voted last week to place signage restricting private use. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. You can't restrict access to my own road. There was a short pause on the line. Then she replied with the calm confidence of someone who believed they were completely right. According to the HOA board, the road connects visually to subdivision property, so it falls under neighborhood infrastructure rules. I frowned.
Visually connects? I repeated slowly. Yes. That's not a legal term. Silence filled the line for a few seconds. Then she said something that made my jaw tighten. If you continue removing HOA property, you may be fined. I stared at the phone for a moment. Then I hung up before saying something I'd regret. When I got home that evening, the situation had escalated. The cones were gone. The sign was gone. But something much worse had appeared. 2 heavy steel barricades had been placed across the entrance of the road where it met the county highway, bright yellow, reflective stripes, and a thick chain running between them, blocking my road completely. For a moment, I just sat there in the truck staring. My house was literally visible at the top of the hill. The porch light had already turned on automatically as the sun dipped behind the trees, but the road leading to it looked like the entrance to a construction site that had been shut down. A small laminated notice hung from the chain in the center. I got out and walked closer. The paper swayed slightly in the breeze as I read it. HOA access road, unauthorized use prohibited. No logos, no official paperwork, just a cheap printed sheet inside a plastic sleeve. I felt a slow wave of anger rise in my chest. They hadn't just put up signs, they had blocked my property access, which meant one thing: they had no idea how badly they had just messed up. I climbed back into the truck and pulled out my phone. Instead of calling the HOA again, I dialed someone else, the county sheriff's non-emergency line. A dispatcher answered after 2 rings. "County sheriff's office?" "Yeah," I said calmly. "I think someone just illegally blocked a private road leading to my house." "What's the address?" I gave it. She paused for a moment while typing something into her computer. Then she asked a question that made me realize this might get interesting. "Are you currently unable to access your residence?" "Yes." Another pause. "All right, sir. We'll send a deputy out." I leaned back in my seat and watched the barricades sitting in the middle of the gravel road. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, turning the sky orange through the branches above the driveway. The evening air had gone quiet again. Except now the silence felt different, like the calm before something big happened. And somewhere down the highway, I could already hear the faint sound of a siren approaching through the trees. The HOA thought they were enforcing neighborhood rules, but they had just stepped into something much bigger. Because blocking a homeowner's legal access road, that wasn't an HOA violation. That was a crime, and the sheriff was about to explain it to them. The patrol car rolled up about 10 minutes later. Red and blue lights flashed briefly before shutting off as the cruiser pulled in behind my truck at the base of the gravel road. The tires crunched softly against the loose stones before the engine idled down. A tall deputy stepped out, adjusting his duty belt as he walked toward the barricades blocking the entrance. His name tag read Harris. He looked from the steel barriers to me, then slowly up the road that stretched through the trees toward my house sitting at the top of the hill. "Evening," he said. "Evening." He nodded toward the barricades. "So these weren't here earlier?" "Nope." "Who put 'em up?" "The HOA." He raised an eyebrow. "The HOA blocked your driveway?" "Technically, it's a private access road," I said, pointing uphill through the trees. "But yeah, same result." Deputy Harris stepped closer to the barriers and examined the chain stretched between the 2 metal frames. It wasn't locked, just looped loosely through the handles like someone wanted it to look official without actually securing it. He lifted the laminated sign hanging from the chain and read it out loud. "HOA access road, unauthorized use prohibited." Then he looked back at me. "You live up there?" "Yep." "And this is the only way in? Unless I want to hike through the woods with groceries." He chuckled slightly at that. "All right," he said. "Let's figure this out." He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and flipped it open. "Do you have proof the road belongs to your property?" I had expected that question the moment I called. When you claim something is your property, especially during a dispute, proof is everything. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a folded copy of the property map from my closing documents. The paper was already worn from being folded several times, but the important section was clearly visible. A long, narrow strip leading from the county road up to the house had been highlighted in yellow. Next to it were the words, "Private Access Easement, Owner Maintained." Deputy Harris studied it carefully under the fading evening light. "County road here," he muttered, pointing with his pen. "Up here, your property line. Access lane runs straight through." He nodded slowly. Yeah, this looks pretty clear. He glanced back toward the barriers sitting in the gravel like they owned the place. Then he asked, "You talked to the HOA about this?" "Earlier today." "And?" "They said the road visually connects to the neighborhood, so they decided to regulate it." The deputy stared at me for a moment. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Not a small chuckle, a full laugh like he had just heard the most ridiculous legal argument imaginable. "I'm pretty sure visually connects isn't enforceable law." That's what I said. He closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket before pulling his radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, can you check if Cedar Ridge HOA filed any permits for road closure near County Route 14? The radio crackled with static before a voice answered a few seconds later. "Negative. No permits on record." Deputy Harris shook his head. "Thought so." Then he walked over to the barriers and grabbed one of the steel frames by the side handle. With a loud scraping sound across the gravel, he dragged it several feet off the road and into the ditch. The reflective stripes flashed in the fading sunlight as it tipped sideways against the brush. Then he grabbed the second barricade and pulled it aside as well. Just like that, the road was open again. He dusted his hands off casually and turned toward me. "You're good to go." "That's it?" "That's it." "But what about them putting it back?" His expression shifted slightly, the humor fading just enough to show he was thinking about the legal side of things now. "Oh, if they do that again," he paused, "then we'll have a different conversation." At that exact moment, headlights appeared at the bottom of the hill. A black SUV turned slowly off the county road and rolled toward us before stopping abruptly when the driver spotted the sheriff's cruiser parked behind my truck. The engine idled for a moment. Then the driver's door swung open. Out stepped a woman in a sharp blazer and heels. Even from a distance, I recognized her immediately from the HOA newsletter. Carol Whitmore, HOA president. She walked quickly toward us, her expression tight with irritation and authority. "What's going on here?" she demanded as soon as she reached the barricades. Deputy Harris crossed his arms calmly. "Evening, ma'am." She pointed sharply at the steel barriers now sitting off to the side of the road. Those were placed there by the Homeowners Association. "Yes," he said evenly. "I just moved them." Her face tightened instantly. "You can't remove HOA property without authorization." The deputy tilted his head slightly. "Actually, I can." She opened her mouth to argue, but he spoke first. "Because you placed barriers across a privately owned access road without legal authority." Silence hung in the air for a moment. Carol blinked like she hadn't expected that response. "That road is part of the neighborhood infrastructure." Deputy Harris held up the property map I had given him. "No, ma'am, it isn't." Her confident posture shifted slightly as she looked at the highlighted easement on the paper. "Our board voted." He cut her off. "The board doesn't have jurisdiction over land outside subdivision boundaries." She turned her gaze toward me like this was somehow my fault. "This road creates traffic concerns." "It's one house," I said. Deputy Harris nodded. "And that house has legal access rights." Carol crossed her arms tightly. "Well, we'll be discussing this with our attorneys." The deputy shrugged calmly. "You're welcome to." Then he gestured toward the open gravel road leading up the hill. "But if these barriers appear here again," he paused long enough for the message to settle in, "we'll be treating it as illegal obstruction of property access." Her face went pale, because suddenly this wasn't a neighborhood disagreement anymore. It was a legal problem, a serious one. Carol didn't say another word. She turned sharply and walked back toward her SUV, heels crunching angrily across the gravel. A moment later, the engine started. The headlights swept across the trees as she turned around and drove back onto the county road. As the vehicle disappeared into the distance, Deputy Harris looked at me and grinned. "Something tells me this isn't over." I looked up the hill toward my house sitting quietly between the trees, then back at the empty entrance to the road. "Yeah," I said, "I have a feeling they're just getting started." And unfortunately, he was right.